is Rachel, working with the Chemung County Historical Society. Today is January 8th, 2021, and I am here interviewing.
I'm Christina Sonsire. Wear a couple of different hats in the community. I am a partner at the Ziff law firm in downtown Elmira. I am also a Chemung County Legislator representing the 7th Legislative District. And this year, I'm the president of the Arctic League.
Okay. This is for the COVID Memory Project, so we're going to be talking COVID. Let's talk first about the Arctic League. Can you tell us what it is that you do in a normal year, and then tell us how that changed for this year?
Yeah, so the Arctic League is a remarkable organization. We call it Chemung County's oldest charitable organization, which I think is true. It was founded in 1912 by a group of men who were out playing baseball, and they found a man who was down on his luck, who they nicknamed Friday. His true name is James Loftus, and they helped him by getting him dental care and clothing and things. And it really sparked this idea of community service and helping people who are having a hard time. It took the nature of helping children at Christmas. So since 1912, Chemung County has, through the Arctic League, had a goal of making sure that all children have gifts at Christmas time. And in a typical year, we don't really start our season until September. We'll meet a couple of times in September and October, and then we have a big live production at the Chemung Center where we have a telethon, we raise money. We start packing with groups in December. Using the 12 days of Christmas, it's typically 12 packing nights where we will have 60 to 70 people at Arctic League headquarters. It's chaos, getting all the bags ready. And then delivery happens on Christmas morning in the wee hours. This year, everything changed. I kept joking that, of course, this was the year that I'm the president. We all serve for 1 year. But back when COVID really started to set in March, at first, I think a number of us were thinking, it's March. By next Christmas, things should be fine. But by the end of April, there were a number of directors. We have 50 directors. And there were a number of us that started to think, we should start taking some precautions and making some plans just in case COVID is still with us. So we had to essentially overhaul everything that we do in our operation. There were many times where we thought, man, we were always committed to making sure that Christmas happens in Chemung County. But there were a number of times we did question, are we going to be able to pull this off? So first, we started our season early, in early October, which allowed us to get the word out to the applicants. One of the big changes we made in terms of applications is that until this year, all of the applications flowed through schools and nonprofit organizations. So they were paper applications. This year, we had an online application. And interestingly, we found that right around 70% of the applications that we got back were online. So that was a great change that I think we will continue on with. We started our fundraising a full month early. We couldn't have a live broadcast at the Chemung Center, so we instead reached out to music groups and other talent groups and had them pre-record their sessions, and we made essentially a pre-recorded broadcast, and then we had some little bits that were done live. Again, that worked well, and we're kind of thinking in the future, maybe we'll do some kind of a hybrid. For packing, instead of having 60 to 70 people at headquarters, we were limited to 24. So we started the packing process early. We had to socially distance. We had masks and face shields and gloves, but we found actually a way to be more effective and get things done with less people in a shorter amount of time. And what probably was our biggest change, something we've talked about for, 10 to 15 years, is the potential of moving delivery back to Christmas Eve. We did it this year. We thought it would take us from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. It took us 1 hour and 17 minutes because the community came out in droves. We had more volunteers than we needed. And what we found is that the recipients really liked getting their gifts a day early so that they could wrap them and have them under the tree. So what we found is that the Arctic League forced us to go through, what we found is that COVID forced us to go through a very uncomfortable period of change. But in the end, we found a lot of changes that we probably will utilize going forward once the pandemic is over.
So I noticed in the paper that you actually had you raised more money money than you had planned on, starting a month early and pushing with the pandemic. So is that also something, an earlier start date that you're thinking of keeping?
I think it's a combination of things. So first, let me put it into context. Our goal for maybe the last 10 years or so has been to raise $125,000. And we have been reaching that goal before Christmas for the last few years. Every time, as soon as we hit the goal, we tell the community, stop giving to us. If you have money that you want to donate, donate it to other nonprofits in our area. This year, we made the call as early as we can recall ever having made it. It was about a week after the broadcast. And we went on to raise another $42,000 after that. After we said, we've closed the book, the money even continues to come in right now, which is going to allow us next year to start out $42,000 ahead. I think it's a combination of things. I do think starting early helped, but what we saw is more donors. My sense is that a lot of people are feeling fairly helpless right now, and they really want to contribute in some way to help someone else. So what we saw is that we had roughly the same number of bigger donors from corporations and things like that, but we had an increased number of the small donations from everyday people that said, you know what, I want to help. So here's $25 or here's $50 that I can help somebody who's living in our own community. The other thing, this is somewhat anecdotal, but what I feel is that there are a lot of people who have been harmed economically. There's no question about that, and harmed in a dramatic way. But there are other people, perhaps people on a fixed income, or people who work in businesses that have actually profited this year, who are feeling a little bad about that and are saying, you know what, I haven't been hurt as much as my neighbor. So how can I find a meaningful way to give back? And we found that, at least as far as the Arctic League goes, that did play out this year.
Okay. Is there any other ways that COVID has impacted the Arctic League, or anything else that you want to talk about related to the Arctic League?
Well, I think just maybe in a softer way, and this is not a way that I can assign any metrics, but I can speak to the board itself. We have a 50-member board. We have always been a close group of people. I think we came out of this as an even stronger team. It was really so meaningful, and it felt so good to work with a group of people on something that was going to do something tangible for someone else. And I do think that we already had a great spirit of teamwork, but I think it's grown exponentially this year. The other piece is with the community. So we are the community's organization, and we always say, and it's true, that anybody who helps out in any way for the Arctic League by donating, packing gifts, delivering, helps in any manner is part of the Arctic League, and we saw our organization grow. People want to be part of something that's going to help. On a kind of a different note, a big change for the Arctic League is that we have partnered with Chemung County to become the first vaccine clinic in Chemung County, where the goal is to vaccinate 40,000, 50,000 people right at Arctic League headquarters. Interestingly, there is some history in this. So back in the 1950s, the Arctic League helped out in a similar way with polio vaccines. And then in the 1970s, the Arctic League rented its headquarters building to the Chemung County Probation Department for much of the year to create a community center where people who maybe had some minor brushes with the law could come in and sit down and have a cup of coffee, play pool, do things to kind of get their lives back on track. So by us doing the vaccine clinic this year, it's different because we are focused on Christmas morning, but when the opportunity presented itself, there was overwhelming support among the board members to do this because we have an opportunity, again, to help the community.
Okay. Do you know when they're planning on having those clinics? Or
it started about an hour ago.
What? They started
about an hour ago. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very
So it was, I can say, it was amazing. The announcement just happened last night, and I hadn't been at headquarters in maybe a week. And we just formalized the agreement with the county within the last few days. And I came in, and you've got the trucks with the vaccine sitting outside. The inside has been transformed. They built entrance ramps. The locks have been changed. It's amazing. So, I know the Arctic League is just thrilled to have this opportunity.
Okay. Well, congratulations. And it's good you're being part of that. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the county legislature. So when did you first come on?
I was elected, I was sworn in January of 2019. So I was elected in November of 2018.
Okay. And you served how long a term?
4 years.
4 years. Okay. So you're about midterm. You've had some time to get acclimatized, and then everything changes because pandemic. So how did the pandemic affect both the operations of the board, and how has the pandemic hit the county and as a whole?
Yeah. So gosh, I mean, there's so many things to unpack here. In terms of the functioning of the legislature, I would say that, on a practical level, we have not met in person very frequently. Thankfully, I led a movement to install live stream equipment in the legislative chambers right from the time that I was sworn in. I was the chairperson of a committee to get that equipment, and we passed a resolution to install the equipment about 2 months before the pandemic hit. So thankfully, that equipment is in the legislative chambers, which has allowed us to have our meetings virtually. Throughout most of the pandemic, under an executive order out of Albany, the legislators have had the option to either appear in person or appear virtually. Most legislators have chosen to appear virtually, frankly, because the Chemung County Health Department has encouraged public bodies to meet virtually if it's possible. The live stream link allows anyone from the public to watch the meetings in the same way that they would if they were in attendance, and still allows the public to make public comment when appropriate. So, I'm thankful that we have the technology that allows us to do this. I can't even imagine 30 years ago how these bodies would function in a pandemic. So that's the practical end. On the other ends, for the first couple of years of this particular legislature, it was fairly rocky. We had a new county executive for the first time in 20 years. A majority of the legislature was new, and there were a lot of bumps, I think, as everyone figured out what their role was. I can only speak for myself that from the moment that this pandemic set in, I have put all of that to the side, because the little issues that we had going on amongst ourselves just pale in comparison to what's going on for the community. I can't say the bumps are worked out yet, but I do believe that most of the legislators are starting to take that big picture viewpoint. It's been sad, I would say, when the new county executive and many new legislators were elected and sworn in back in 2019. There was so much momentum. So if you recall back then, the LECOM building was just being built. We had a lot of new businesses in Big Flats, new restaurants opening in Elmira. And there was this feeling that, something very good is happening in Elmira. And I don't mean to say that it's not. And perhaps when people are watching this decades from now, they'll say, oh gosh, that was when the turning point happened. But at this very moment, it feels sad. The pandemic has really affected that momentum. Our restaurants have been closed for the majority of the year. People are hurting. That momentum has really been halted. And in terms of the legislature itself, a lot of the issues that are of particular interest to me, which, let's say the environment, right? There are lots of opportunities to pass resolutions that will help the environmental picture in Chemung County, and then put on the back burner, because right now we're still in emergency mode. On the one hand, we have the public health aspect, and we still have a great uncertainty about municipal finances. We're conducting this interview 12 days before a new Congress and president are begin their work down in Washington, D.C., and hopefully the folks in Washington, D.C. do the right thing, which is give direct aid to municipalities. But if that doesn't happen, I feel very, very concerned about what is going to happen financially over the next 1 to 5 years here in Chemung County.
Do you know how much revenue you've lost due to the pandemic as a taxing entity, or? It's
very, very difficult to quantify. At the same time that we've had these hits, and primarily when I say hits, it's through the sales tax revenue. It turned out, there were times during 2020 when the predictions were that the losses in sales tax revenue were going to eat up all of the reserve that Chemung County has. It didn't end up happening, and it was in great part because during the late summer months, we had a bit of a resurgence. So people were out doing more things. Our restaurants were open. People were buying gasoline. But of course, starting in October here in Chemung County, we've gone back down into a time when we have a lot more restrictions. So that piece remains very unsettled. Thankfully, we have a county executive right now who's very fiscally conservative. And absent the pandemic altogether, he has been looking for places to save money right from the start. So because of those efforts, and I think a legislature who understands, particularly now, why that's so important, we didn't take as big of a hit as other places. We did, interestingly, the Chemung County Legislature raised property taxes in 2019 for the first time in almost 20 years. And I'm really grateful that we did. We talked about doing it again this year. It obviously would be nice to have the additional revenue, but we didn't feel it was fair to community members at a time when people are hurting so much to add on yet another tax. Again, to me, the critical pieces going forward are going to be sales tax. Are people spending money? And B, the federal government. I do want to add on sales tax. Thankfully, the New York State government just a few years ago did impose sales tax on online purchases. So as people haven't been out doing things, we do know those Amazon trucks are very busy. So the local government is getting a share of the sales tax that's generated by the online purchases, even though everyone should be buying local.
Okay. Do you have anything else to add about the legislature, the county, and the impact of COVID on any of that?
Well, let me see how I want to phrase this. As we've gone through this, we have unfortunately, as a nation, had very little coordinated response from the federal government. So from the start, the federal government and our current president, Donald Trump, have said, we're not taking the lead on this, it's up to the states. And states, frankly, including New York State, were just not prepared for pandemic response. It's not typically what states do. So without the coordinated response from the federal government and having a state that wasn't necessarily prepared for this, a lot of the work has fallen back on the county. And the county health department and our county executive, Chris Moss, acting in the role as the emergency manager, have been tasked with coordinating all of this response. I think they have done the best that they could under these circumstances, but my hope is that as a nation, once we get past this, we can sit back and because it is going to happen again, unfortunately. I keep saying to my kids, I hope you're one and done with pandemics, but the likelihood is in our children's lifetime or maybe our grandchildren's lifetime, it's going to happen. So we can't do this again where we push the response to a global pandemic down on a county. We've just seen that it doesn't work.
Okay. So shifting gears again, you are a lawyer, you're a mom, you're a wife, you're a cat owner. How has the pandemic affected all of those aspects?
It's one of these things. There's a silver lining, and that is, I hope I don't cry here. There's a silver lining, which is it's the relationship with my daughters. I'm a working mom who does a lot of things. So this year, my husband and I, we spoke, and for our kids, they're hopefully only going through this once, and we had to make sure that they were the priority. I do need to add one other thing. My husband ran for county court judge last year, so in 2020. So we added that on top of it. He announced his candidacy about 3 months before the pandemic set in, and it was already underway. So we had no choice but to continue there. And so I ended up saying, you know what? I have a duty to my children, to my clients, the folks that have hired me, and my constituents, and then my husband. But I had to make kids the priority. So I have worked from home, I would have to say 90% or more of the time. My children were home from school for most of it. It was unbelievable. I mean, you can see behind me a school that we built, and we just had to figure out a way. Thankfully, the Ziff law firm is a wonderful place to work and to be. We made it through. It wasn't our best year. It wasn't our worst year. I just keep trying to push my cases. And I think I'm no different than anyone else, where you had to institute a whole lot of flexibility, which means working when you can and taking things out of order, sometimes working at night, sometimes early in the morning, lunchtimes. I love running and exercise and all of that. And there have been plenty of times I just had to figure out what could be cut, and that would be cut, but it's okay. I don't know. I think the burden has fallen much more greatly on women, and it's not a knock on the men. The moms out there have recognized that we have this foremost duty to our children to be there for them. And it was one part I just couldn't in my heart have stomached. I wouldn't say abandoning them, but leaving to go to work every day and having them they're in 6th and 3rd grade. I mean, they needed me through this. And like I said, the silver lining is that the closeness we have, it's not that we were very close before, but it's on a totally different level now. I think it's every unit, whatever it is, if it's your nuclear family or your friends, whatever group you've bonded with through this, those bonds are going to be there forever.
Okay, so how are your kids doing in school? Are they in school? Are they hybriding? What have they been doing?
So they were out. They go to St. Mary Our Mother School in Horseheads, which is a very small school. There's only one class per grade with an average of maybe 15 students. So it's very small compared to other schools. Starting March 16th, they did not attend school at all in the spring. It was all virtual. They went back 5 days a week in mid-September when school started. Unfortunately, my 6th grade daughter had a classmate test positive right off the bat. And so because of that, she was in a quarantine, which caused my other daughter to be in one. And they went back then for 2 days, and then the school shut down. So they were in school in the fall for maybe, 2.5 weeks. They went back right before Christmas, and then we got 20 inches of snow, and so school was canceled again. And so right now, we are conducting this interview on a Friday. I don't know if you can see the bags under my eyes. We are concluding our first 5-day week since maybe we had one in September, but 5 days of getting up and out the door. I think, how have they fared through this? I don't know. Academically, I think fine. Being at home so much, we ended up doing some really interesting projects. Something the Historical Society would love is my dad loves rummage sales. And so a few years ago, he was at, I don't know if it was an estate sale or rummage sale or whatever. And he bought for about $5 a huge bag of Elmira Telegram and Star Gazette newspapers from the 1930s to maybe the 1950s. There's probably 100. So we had a lot of fun reading those. It was just a neat thing to do. My daughter's teacher is amazing. She had the same teacher for English Language Arts, or ELA, in the spring and the fall. And they ended up reading 2 novels about the Holocaust. So that was very interesting to read and explore in the context of the pandemic. So I think for the children to understand that, as unsettling as this is, it's not the first time that things have happened, and the world's going to go on. My hope for this generation is that they do realize things aren't guaranteed, and maybe the takeaway will be not to take things for granted, as maybe a lot of us have for a long time. This year, birthday parties canceled, Thanksgiving, Christmas, their sports, their camps, everything. So for them to see, all right, things can happen. And so as we eventually get back to normal, that's what I dream about. One of my daughters has a summer birthday, and I was just saying to her, hon, I can't wait until this is over and we have a big barbecue for your birthday, and we'll invite everybody over. And I think had this not happened, it would still be very fun, but those events are going to take on a totally different meaning once we can do them again. And on an interesting note, you're asking, as a family. So we decide, we kind of live in the country. We live on 5 acres, but it's wooded. And so we decided to do a lot of things around the house. And one of them was to get some chickens. And that has been very, very fun for the kids. So we got them as chicks in the summer from our neighbors, actually. And now we have 3 chickens and a rooster. One just started laying eggs. And we cleared a big area to start a big garden, which we've wanted to do for years. I think across the country and probably the world, we're getting more in touch with the earth and our roots and spending so much time at home. There are going to be good takeaways, even though, we're speaking in January of 2021. What I keep saying, January 2021, there is a light we can all see. So we have a vaccine. We're going to be having tremendous changes in our government, which for me, I think is a very good thing. So the light is there. We just have to get across the precipice to it. And hopefully when someone's watching this, at some point that ends up being true.
Right. So I know birthday parades have been a big thing this year. What did you end up doing for your daughter's birthday?
I mean, on an interesting note, in 2019, we decided to get a swimming pool at our house. And obviously we didn't know the pandemic was coming, but we decided, we're kind of homebodies anyway. So we decided, all right, this will be something really fun to do. It turned out to be the best thing because at least we had a pool we could go out and just go swimming, and it made being at home much more tolerable. So they both have warm weather birthdays, and we just hung out at the pool. I mean, it was our first year of having it, made it a novelty, but we just weren't able to do what we normally do by any means. I'm a big birthday party mom. I love to plan. We've had Harry Potter birthday parties. We had a kids baking championship birthday party, all over the board. So all I know is that whenever this thing is done, we are going to have huge birthday bashes. It's going to be very, very fun.
So, shifting gears slightly, so you're a lawyer. When we were logging on, you were having trouble because your husband, who is also a lawyer, was doing some kind of trial stuff. How has the pandemic affected the way trials and court work in Chemung County? Oh, so
as far as civil trials go, civil court, there has been none. So as of right now, our sitting Supreme Court judge, his name is Chris Baker, is scheduling trials out for roughly 18 months from now. So we have not had a single civil jury trial since last March. Same with the criminal side. So there have been no criminal jury trials since last March. In family court, where my husband works, things are a little bit different because my husband works for Chemung County on severe abuse and neglect cases. And those cases can't wait. So parents obviously have very fundamental rights over the custody of and guardianship of their children. When those rights are affected, courts can't wait. So right now, as we speak, my husband had an exposure to COVID at work. Half of his office has tested positive this week. So as we're talking up in my office/school, he's in the dining room in a trial that he's conducting virtually with 4 other lawyers, and it's on a severe abuse case. In fact, yesterday, my husband was at home. He had an appellate argument to the 3rd Department in Albany that he conducted on a death case, an 8-year-old daughter, or let me rephrase that. He had an argument to the 3rd Department involving an 8-year-old girl who had been beaten to death. And because of the nature of the courts right now, that argument had to be conducted virtually.
So there have been no trials except in family court
since March. Now, things are slightly different in Pennsylvania. Bradford County, Pennsylvania is the only county, to my knowledge, in Pennsylvania that has held civil jury trials. I have one scheduled right now for the 2nd week of February. It sounds interesting. What the judge has proposed is, for the most part, the lawyers will be in one room and the jurors, who will obviously be masked, will be in another room, and we will be Zooming between them. In this particular case, it's a medical malpractice action against Robert Packer Hospital and Guthrie. And the expectation is that the trial could go anywhere from a week and a half to 2 weeks. I don't think this is fair to my client that we are going to expect jurors to sit in masks for 2 weeks in an empty room watching Zoom testimony. So we'll see. I don't know how it's going to go.
So you're primarily a civil lawyer?
Yes, I am a civil plaintiff's lawyer, primarily involved in medical malpractice actions, but also any type of action where a person has been harmed.
Okay. So you're still doing things like filing and depositions, but not the actual trials?
Yes. And interestingly, there's been a movement toward what's called alternative dispute resolution, or ADR, and that's things like mediations and arbitrations, because both sides, plaintiff and defense, realize that we can't just let our cases sit for years on end without having any type of resolution. So for the first maybe 6 months or so of 2020, there was little movement, and it hurt the plaintiff side. We handle all of our cases on what's called a contingency fee. So the law firm and the client obviously are not compensated in any way until the case resolves. So we were very worried, thinking, our case is ever going to resolve. But on the defense side, those attorneys are paid by the hour, and the insurance companies need to free up liabilities on their books. So I think by midway through 2020, there was a recognition that, we can't just ground the entire civil justice system to a halt. And there have been many creative ways to do things. A good takeaway there is that the travel for depositions gets incredibly expensive, especially if you're required to take a deposition of someone who's in another state, California, Florida, what have you. But now the technology is there, and the rules have been tweaked enough to allow for full depositions to be done virtually. That's something that I think will probably continue for some, I would say, indefinitely.
It's a more efficient way of doing business?
Yeah, from at least my perspective right now is, if it is a very consequential deposition, I want to be, if it's safe to do so, I want to be in the same room with the witness, because I want to evaluate in real time, face to face, the person's facial expressions, and I want the person to hear my voice and see me in real time. However, that's against all the costs and the time that goes into it. So I would say in a typical case, you maybe have 2 to 3 very consequential depositions, and then a lot of others that maybe take a half an hour because you just need to get one fact on the record. So instead of now driving to Buffalo to sit for half an hour to have somebody confirm that the light was red, we can do that via Zoom. Okay.
And so you were saying that there have been some tweaks to laws for the pandemic. Would there have to be additional permanent tweaks in order to?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there have been so many executive orders, it would enough to make your head spin. But some of them, I would imagine, will be codified this year. For instance, being able to notarize a document when you view it being signed via Zoom or FaceTime or what have you. That saves so much time. So let's just give the example of, I have a client, let's say, who gets into a terrible car crash and is in a hospital in Rochester. So instead of having to send a notary there or drive to Rochester simply to get a notarized signature, I can now just have a family member or the client get on a phone, I watch the signature be taken, and we go. Same with rules for doing Zoom and what's admissible. All of those things that probably would have happened over the next 10 years, let's say, as people become more comfortable with technology, got sped up by the pandemic, and I think will stay with us. If I can switch gears for 1 second, what I do think will be interesting is the long-term impact on the schools. So the spring, even with the best school and the best teachers imaginable, was a bit of a train wreck in terms of technology. Not so much with my older daughter, but trying to put second graders on a Zoom, you'd have some kids picking his nose, the other one's putting a fake background on. At one point, I remember the teacher was trying to show the transformation of a butterfly, from all the way from the caterpillar to the butterfly. And so each day they get on, and it was just not working. It's great now. I don't have anything negative to say, except that it's just kids need socialization, but the actual education that goes on virtually is pretty good. My just deepest hope is that we never get to a point where lawmakers say, you know what, we could save a whole lot of money if we just make school virtual or part of school virtual. Because if you think you need less teachers, you don't need buses, you save on infrastructure costs and utilities and everything else. And I just pray we never get there. I'll tell you just two quick examples of what makes your heart tear is the first time I heard pounding from my third grader's room, and I thought, what is that? And I walk in, and here she is with an iPad set up, and she's doing jumping jacks for online gym class. It's just not what she should be doing. And then another time that's slightly funny but sad is I hear pounding, and I go into my sixth grader's bedroom. She's in her bedroom with a hoodie on and the shades pulled with pencils in her hand, and she was pounding on her desk. And so I mouthed, what are you doing? And it was music class. They were drumming. And that's just not that part. I mean, can you learn algebra virtually? Probably, but you can't learn the social skills that we need to have a functioning society. So I hope we never, ever get to a place where that becomes the norm.
So I know I've talked with folks in like Horseheads and Aaron about the digital divide issue in terms of a lot of folks, and especially in the more rural areas, just don't have the bandwidth to get on and get their kids on and get their kids learning. Is that something that the county government is interested in?
Absolutely.
Any movement on that at the county level?
Absolutely. I mean, there have been a tremendous number of improvements this year. It's not 100%, but there have been, where we are right now is much better than we were 1 year ago. If I'm slipping back into kind of parenting thought, my concern much more than the digital divide is the kids whose parents have not been able to invest the time in their education. Now, for many of them, maybe you have parents you have two essential workers, or maybe it's a single parent who's an essential worker. Or, I know firsthand, unfortunately, through my husband, just how many kids are out there kind of fending for themselves anyway, and school becomes the one place they can go for the love and nurturing that they need. We're coming up on a year. There are going to be a lot of students that did not receive much of an education for an entire year. I don't know what those long-term repercussions are going to be. All I can say is I know how extraordinarily stressful it has been to try to do this. And my husband and I are very fortunate to be able, for myself, for instance, to work from home for almost a year, to be able to invest the time and energy. And because I am not an essential worker. He's not. He typically has to be in the office much more. But a lot of families just were not in that position. And I'm very, very worried about what lies ahead.
Okay. Holidays just happened, Christmas, Thanksgiving. How did that affect, what do you normally do? How did this affect you?
Yeah, so we host all of the holidays in our family. I don't know how that happened. It just did. My husband loves to cook. I love having people come over to our house. So this year it was much different. We have numerous. We've been listening to the rules, right? So limiting indoor gatherings to 10 people. We've at this point really created I would say a strict bubble that involves my parents, who really don't see anybody but us, and a sister and brother-in-law and their children, and that's kind of our unit. Typically for holidays, we have many people come. Unfortunately, I had an aunt who had a very serious health issue. She always comes for every holiday. Let me say this again so you can use the clip. For my entire life, so I'm 44 years old, I have spent every Christmas and Thanksgiving with my parents and one aunt, and then there were several others who have since passed on. But I've spent every single Thanksgiving and Christmas of my entire life with those three. None of them could be there for this Thanksgiving. My aunt ended up having a very serious health issue. She was at Bethany. She's still having some problems. We had an exposure issue. It's just was sad, but I think what we're all taking the mindset of, all right, we're going to get through this. So I would much rather have my parents be around for the next, 20 years than be hasty now. And we all are sharing the mindset. Actually, it was cute on Thanksgiving. My dad always makes the mashed potatoes. And so he showed up on noon on Thanksgiving with a big bowl of mashed potatoes, and he handed us the mashed potatoes, and we gave him a bunch of stuffing and pie, and then we Zoomed with him later, and it was just like, okay, it's just what it is. I think, again, coming back on the kids, it's the resiliency. So they've had to learn that this can happen. Hopefully it never happens again in their lifetime, but this can happen. When it does, we all have to pitch in as a community. One thing can I bring up something that we haven't talked about that I think might be interesting? Let me see how I want to phrase this. I have had a tremendous amount of frustration with segments of our community over the past year. So when this pandemic first started back in March, there was an outpouring of community spirit. There was this swelling of love for first responders and healthcare providers. And there was this idea of, hashtag we're all in this together. And I think that was the widespread feeling. And it quickly broke down within a couple of months. And so you had what I believe to be the majority of our community still feeling that way of, I'm going to do my part. But you had an increasingly loud part of our community that said either this is a hoax, it's not real, this is the election infection, whatever you want to call it. Or you had people that said, you know what? If you're afraid, you stay home. I'm going to do what I want to do. And that has grown and grown. My opinion, this is just anecdotal. I think it led in large part to the huge outbreaks that we've had in Chemung County. So over the summer, it just took getting on social media to see that you had huge parts of our community simply acting as though nothing was wrong. And where we stand right now is that our community has been in what's called the orange zone, which is a designation made by the state government now since October. And as a result of it, there have been many restrictions. The one that is still getting a lot of attention is the closure of restaurants and bars to indoor dining and indoor drinking. And there is so much pressure on local government officials, including myself, to stand up for the restaurants, stand up for the bars. Where are you? Why aren't you fighting for us? I've been one of the only, if not the only, government officials to take a different stance where I've said, what, I certainly support restaurants. I have many friends and family members that own them, that work in them, and I live here and want them to survive. I think there should be a great amount of financial support that's provided, particularly by the federal government, should be going directly to these owners. I don't think we should have indoor dining right now. We have one opportunity right now to get this pandemic under control until we can get enough people vaccinated. And the idea of fighting so that people can go in and stand at a bar without their masks indoors, to me, makes no sense. I don't know where this is headed. In fact, as we're conducting this interview, there is a court hearing going on in Buffalo to decide some very important issues regarding indoor dining. Now, perhaps the courts will say, look, the spread of COVID inside restaurants is so low, let's go for it. If we do, I just hope that the people in our community are smart and they actually follow the rules, because that was not the case for much of this year.
Okay. So you're one of those people who, when they hear we've got to get the economy going, are like, how about we stop dying first?
My thought process through all of this is, of course we need to get the economy going. And we're going to get the economy going when we get the pandemic under control. It's a chicken and egg thing. You get the economy going prematurely, which the writing was on the wall the entire time. Open everything up. There were people storming capitals, open the economy. And so many lawmakers in our country did not have the courage to say no. They're too interested in getting reelected. They're too interested in getting their campaign donations. So they said, all right, we're opening it all up. We opened it all up, and we're the worst nation in the world for the pandemic. It's ridiculous. Had we taken this seriously from the start, and you know what I say is, if we had taken this seriously, the sad part is that most of us did, but enough of us didn't. And enough of our leaders didn't have the guts to do something about it, and that's why we are where we are.
Okay. is there anything else you'd like to add about that, or anything else that's been going on in this country, like
I don't know.
the other day?
I mean, yeah, I could, let me add to that. So at this moment, it's hard to find words to characterize the psyche of the American population. We have had so much put on our shoulders, I would say, for the last 4 years. I am not someone who's afraid for me to say what the obvious truth is that Donald Trump has been a horrific president from the moment he started to run for office. In fact, when Donald Trump announced his candidacy, I was on the executive board of the Chemung County Republican Committee. And one of the very early debates back in 2015, when he and others took the stage, and you could see the focus on social issues and the divisiveness and the vitriol on the stage, the very next day I went to the Board of Elections and I just said, take my name off. I cannot participate. I'm thankful we seem to be at the end. I don't know that we can take much more. I was saying to you actually before we started this interview that I think we're all sane right now, but I'm not sure. I think it's going to take us getting back to a place of calm to realize just how chaotic all of this has been. We're a nation that is built upon fundamental principles of democracy and freedoms and rights. And I mean, we could go all day on that. We have a checkered history in the United States, but the fundamental principles are there. I'm very thankful that at least right now, it seems like most people in government are stepping up for the Constitution. I mean, it literally became a choice between the Constitution and Donald Trump. We're choosing the Constitution, but we have these parallel crises right now of a constitutional crisis that is still unfolding as we're conducting the interview, and a pandemic. The history books will tell the full story. I don't know that we don't know the ending yet.
Okay, but that does sound like a really good ending for this interview, unless you have anything else to add, because that's just like a great mic drop.
Okay.
Well, did you have anything else to add?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for agreeing to this interview. I'm going to stop the recording now.